Hello, I'm Mrs H. You can find my patterns at www.mrs-h.com. In today's sew along, we're going to be sewing the Take Me Out evening bag by She Wears Red Feathers. We've released this under the Mrs H brand, which is why I'm doing the video for you. I've got two here in two different fabrics. They're both exactly the same. The only difference is that this one's got the metal edge trim and this one hasn't. Other than that, they're exactly the same. I've made this one out of some faux leather and this one out of some quilting cotton, although it is glittery because why not? So on the back we've got this fixed length strap. If you want to use it as a clutch, you can always take the strap off. You can take these D-rings off, or you can leave them on and not use the strap on it, or you can change this out for a purse strap or an adjustable length strap if you want to wear it crossbody. This one is a nice fixed length to wear with your coat if you want to wear it out and about or just on your body. It sits around about my hip level for me, so you can make that longer or shorter, however you prefer. Okay, and then inside we've got a magnetic snap for the closure and one zip pocket. Okay, so this one is a nice little zip pocket. You can always add extra slip pockets if you prefer. There's box corners on the bottom and the lining is nice and snug inside. I'll show you inside of my red one as well, although construction is exactly the same. I've made them both the same. So I've used my contrast lining fabric for my strap and for my strap tabs, just so it didn't get too thick. And you can see the boxed bottom on this one, on this plain fabric, plain vinyl. And then inside I've got my magnetic snap, and again I've got my zip pocket in there as well. Okay, this one I've left off the metal edge trim and I think it still looks great, although it does look fabulous with the metal edge trim, and that one's an Emmeline metal edge trim. So gather your supplies together and let's get sewing. Right, so let's have a little look at some of the pieces that are different from what we would usually do. So I've got interfacing on my lining pieces, all of my lining pieces, okay, and then on my exterior I've got my strap. I've cut mine as one piece, so I've only got the one piece, and then I've got a big gap of interfacing at each end. Okay, so just follow the pattern on that one. And then I've got my two strap tabs and I've added my Decaville light to those. I've got my back and my front. So the front is slightly different, it's just got this curved cutout here at the center of the front, and on the back I've applied my Decaville light. Have a look in the pattern because it tells you to cut away the bottom corners of your Decaville light before you fuse it on. Now remember, only cut away the bottom corners on the Decaville light for the front piece with the corner, or sorry, the cutout curve at the top. So do your corner cutouts at the bottom. Okay, I'm going to use those in a second. And then flap, I've got my Decaville light added to my exterior flap, and the fleece added to my lining flap. Okay, everything else is as you would expect it. My lining front and back are just interfaced, and I've got my two pocket pieces, they are just interfaced all the way. Okay, so we can pop those to one side and let's carry on with preparing our pieces. So you need your front and your back, okay, assuming you've fused everything that's supposed to be fused. And then what we're going to do is get our foam pieces and we're going to pop these on, so right side up, and just smooth out over the foam that we've got here. Okay, do one at a time, and let's see if I can get pins through this fabric. It's a little bit glittery, which is nice. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to get pins through it. Yes, I can. That's great. Okay, Oh, except if I'm sewing, let's have a think. Yes, that's the right way to put my pins in. I'm right-handed, so I want to know that I'll be able to pull these out nice and easily. Okay, now throughout this pattern it does have some abbreviations. So SA is seam allowance, and it tells you what the seam allowance is in the front, baste and top stitch, etc. It tells you what the seam allowances are. Right, that's the front panel. We also need to do the same for the back panel. Exactly the same. I've just used some scraps of foam that I had in my scrap box, which is why they're not quite even. But we find that keeping these bigger pieces does save a bit of money in the long run. All adds up, doesn't it? Especially if you're using fancy fabric. Although I think I may have had this fabric from the swap table at retreat, which is really nice because it's a lovely, lovely fabric to have been gifted. So thank you very much, whoever brought that. Okay, so now we are going to baste all around. So have a look at the pattern for the seam allowance for basting. I'm going to go up to my longest stitch length. And which one's this one? This one's the back. So it's just a rectangle all the way around. I better check the seam allowance actually before I carry on. Great, okay. So all I'm doing is removing the pins as I come to them. Should have kept this pin pot out, shouldn't I? And as I approach the corner, I'm going to stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot, pivot, and then lower my presser foot again to carry on. And I'm just going to sew around all four sides of this piece. Go a little bit further just so I'm within the seam allowance. Don't want any basting stitches to show afterwards. Although if they do, I can just unpick them, so you don't need to worry too much. Okay, we're nearly back to where we started. Don't need to back stitch at the start and the end because this is literally just to hold it in place while we're sewing. So we can pop that to one side and I'll work on my front piece. Now just take care when basting this on that you follow this curve cutout. Okay, so I'm going to start on one of the straight edges so I can get myself into the swing of things before we get to that trickier part. We're just doing exactly the same as we did for the back piece. Just going to pivot at the corners and then just adjust your presser foot as you need to be able to maintain that that curved cutout, sorry. I meant curved cutout, but it came out as corner. I'm obviously thinking too much about corners. Okay, and there's no rush on this, so just take it stitch by stitch if you need to. Okay. Got a few loose threads hanging around here. I'm sure they'll catch up with me later. Right, nearly there. There we go. Didn't really need to backstitch then. I think it's just force of habit. I backstitch at the start and end of every seam, so I think that's why. Okay. Right, lovely. So now we're going to turn it over, and if you've got duck-billed scissors, then Lynn does suggest that these do help. I haven't, so I'm just going to turn it over and pull in the foam back, holding my scissors almost horizontal. Just going to trim as close as I can to the stitches. Just to trim this excess foam away from the seam allowance, and this will help your seams just to sit really nice and neat after you've done your final construction. It does help to just reduce the bulk a little bit, and also if your machine's not quite so strong, it's a little bit extra foam that you're not having to go through when you're sewing, because it's only just in the seam allowance. Okay, right, so that's the front one done. Don't worry too much if you do snip through your stitches. Try not to, but it doesn't matter if you do. Okay, so that's my front. That's nice. We can pop that to one side for the minute. And then we're going to trim the foam away from the back as well. So exactly the same. You don't need to do this too carefully, as long as you don't snip your fabric and you don't snip too many of your basting stitches, you should be okay to just whiz along. Okay, all the way along this side as well. And then the last side. Okay, and then that'll be all of our pieces prepped, ready to sew, which is quite exciting. Okay, lovely. Right, so those can go to one side for the minute. The main panels, got my front and my back. They can go to one side, and we'll start working on our strap tabs and flap. Okay, so we're going to retrieve our strap first. So if you've pieced yours together or you're using one piece, it doesn't matter. I'm going to follow it exactly the same as we do. Okay, so we need to press the short ends inwards by 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre. So the easiest way I find of doing this is to double it and draw a line. Okay, so 3/8 of an inch times by 2 is approximately 3/4 of an inch. Sorry, I'm just looking for my chalk pen. I don't know if it's maybe gone for a little walk. Oh, there it is. It's in my sewing box underneath the desk. Nearly had me then. Okay. So I'm going to draw a line at 3/4 of an inch or 20 mil. And then what I'm going to do, I've got my tiny iron here, little pressing mat. I'm going to fold the raw edge up to meet that line. Okay. So because I've doubled it and drawn a line, I can fold it up to that line, and I know that that then will be completely accurate to 3/8 of an inch. Oh, hang on. My iron got caught on my foot there underneath. Okay. Give that a little press, and I'm just going to clip that to hold it in place. I haven't got my iron too hot because I've got beautiful glittery fabric. Okay, and we're going to do the same on the other short end as well. I'm going to draw my line at 3/4 of an inch or 20 mil. and then fold this short raw edge up to meet that line. Give it a little gentle press. And then I'm going to clip it just for a second. Oh, look at that, perfectly colour matched there. Nearly quite so well on there, don't know. Okay, then what we're going to do is we are going to fold this in half lengthwise and give it a little press. So this bit that we've folded and clipped, we can unclip. So we'll just fold it in half lengthwise. I'm concentrating on the short end first because we've got that little fold over. I want to be quite accurate on the end. So I'm going to press that bit first and then work my way along the length of it, just very gently on my glittery fabric. I'm just going to work my way along, folding and pressing so that it's in half exactly. There we go. Nearly to the end. Just folding and pressing in half. And as we approach this second end, I can take these clips off. I only put those on there just because my fabric is a little bit more bouncy and I've got a low heat because of my fabric. Okay, so that whole length is folded in half. Then we are going to open up and fold the long edges in towards the centre and give that a press. Okay, now if you've got a preferred method for doing a strap like this, then please do feel free to change it. Okay, I'm just going to clip this side where the end is because we want that to be nice and neat. This is a nice length strap, it's not too long, so you're not feeling like you're spending hours and hours and hours pressing it and stitching it. Comes together quite quickly, which is good. Okay, and we'll just move along and again pressing the long edge into the centre and then moving along a bit more or turning it around, whichever you prefer. And again, that short end is the bit that we want to be really nice and neat and accurate. Okay, and I'm just going to clip that while we're working on the other half. I'll go back to the other side. Should have cooled down a little bit now. And we are again folding that long edge into the centre to meet the other long edge. Okay, so both of your long edges should meet in the middle there. And I'll clip that side. Oh, I could probably actually clip on the end and get both bits at once. That's a very good idea. Well done me. Okay, right, so just working our way along again, making sure that these raw edges, long raw edges, meet in the middle, like so. Working my way along slowly but surely. This is an awful lot easier if you've got a proper ironing board and a full-size iron, I will tell you that. So don't feel tempted to swap your full-size iron for a mini travel one unless you have to. It's fine if you are a little bit limited on space, but if you've got the space for a full-size iron and ironing board, then I would recommend that you keep it. Right, I'm coming back towards the end, the second end. So I'm just going to flip it around and concentrate on that little end again. Make sure that we get that bit really, really accurate. And I'll clip that. I just find that clipping it while it cools down helps to train it almost. Okay. What we're going to do now is fold this in half along the original line, and you might find that you need to press it. You might find that it's got some nice enough creases that you can just carry on. Give mine a little crease. I'm going to clip this end because you guessed it, I want to make sure that's nice and neat. Just working my way along. Just folding in half and giving it a little press. You can clip it as you go if you want, or you can rely on the heat of the iron to keep it in place. Your choice. As long as it goes through your presser foot nice and flat and accurately, you should be okay for a nice neat strap. Okay. Now if you want to change this out for a purse chain or an adjustable strap, you can do that very, very easily. So this one's a fixed length strap, but if you want to swap it out, you can do without too much hassle. So feel free to do that. There's no rules that say you have to follow exactly this suggestion that we've given you. Right, so what we're going to do now is top stitch. So that's at 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge of the open end of the open side of the strap. I'm going to use my regular stitch length. So let me change down to that, or your top stitch in stitch length if you like to have a different one. And I'm going to start sewing. You don't need to back stitch as long as you overlap a couple of stitches when you finish. And I've just realised how perfectly my nails match this fabric. You could almost imagine it was planned. Okay, so I'm going to carry on going until I get near to the end, the short end of this strap. Take my clip off. Okay, what I'm going to do is stop with my needle down and lift my presser foot. It's still held under the needle, as you can see. Pivot, lower my presser foot and carry on sewing to the other corner and repeat. And we're going to go all the way around all 4 sides of this strap, both long edges and the 2 short edges as well. Now I'm going to see if I can pull my thread through to the back here. Got a little bit of a something's gone on here. I don't think I pulled my threads out far enough when I pulled them to the back. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I'm approaching my second end, so I'm going to take that clip off, go as close as I can to the corner without going over that top stitch and seam allowance. Pivot, turn, and again, and we're going back to where we started and overlap a couple of stitches, and I'm going to leave my threads long so that I can pull them through to the back and tie them off. There's an extra one coming through now. Okay, so I've got 4 threads all together, so I'm just going to divide them into 2 and tie the 4 threads all together. I think that's quite unobtrusive and a good option. Okay, you're going to need some hardware next. We're going to need our swivel clips, so go ahead and grab those. Got my little pouch of hardware here. Okay, I'm using Emmeline Bags hardware. because I find it very, very, very shiny and I like it. Okay, so now we are going to fold the ends of our strap through the swivel clips. Now pay attention to the pattern, it will tell you how far to fold it through. And what I like to do is line up that measurement mark on my ruler and then fold along the end of the ruler to make sure it's nice and accurate. Okay, and I'll do the same with the other end. So just folding it through the hardware. Oh, hang on, that's not right. Make sure that both of your ends are on the same side of your strap. Make sure this is in the right place. There we go. Okay, and now we are going to sew across. You can either reinforce it, you can sew across in a box, or you can wait and pop a little double cap rivet in there if you prefer. Okay, I'm just going to sew across for now, and then I'll come back later and add some rivets after I've finished. Okay, so I've gone over that 3 times. I'm leaving my thread tails long. I'm going to tie those off, and then I'll do the same on the second end. And leave those thread tails long again so I can tie them off. Okay. Now this will take me a minute, so please do talk amongst yourselves. So I need to do this on the back side. And pull my threads through to match. Okay. I'm just going to tie. I've got 4 lots to tie off, so please feel free to fast forward me if you like. It's not the most interesting viewing, I know, watching me tie threads. Although the fabric's very pretty. In fact, you can't even see me tying threads because I'm doing it off the camera. Sorry, very sorry. I'm trying to get used to. I've changed my camera angle, and I'm just trying to get used to the positioning of it. The last thing I filmed was a very, very large project, so the camera angle was slightly different, and we've moved it inwards for this one because this one's the exact opposite. It's a very small project, which is nice. Nice to have a bit of variety, isn't it? Okay, so I've just pulled on the bobbin threads to get a loop, and you can pull the top thread through then, tie those off. If you've backstitched, you can just trim them, maybe add a little dab of fray check, or you might choose to just use rivets instead and not do any stitches. It's your choice. Or you might choose a purse chain or a ready-made handle, adjustable strap. You can make this bag your own, really. Just think about how you or the recipient would use it, and you can modify it how you like. Okay, right, lovely. So that's our strap finished. We can pop that to one side for the moment. Okay, we're not going to use that until the very, very end. What we can do now is grab hold of our strap tabs F. Okay, we need our iron again, tiny iron and tiny pressing mats. And then we are just going to fold the fabric over this Decaville light and give it a little press. Okay. I'm going to clip that just to stop it being too bouncy. And then we're going to do the same on the other side, so that those long edges meet in place. Okay. So the Decaville light is slightly smaller, but that's intentional. Okay. Let's add a couple of clips on here just to hold that in place while it cools, and we'll stitch that afterwards. We'll do the other one first. Strap tab, there we go. There's one side. Clip that. This is quite nice because you get a nice crisp, accurate strap tab. Nice crisp, accurate edge on these with the Decaville folding over it. Okay. Let's clip these then to cool for a moment. That's it, lovely. Okay, so while that one's cooling, we'll stitch the first one that we did, and on the right side we are going to top stitch down each long edge. Okay, so pay attention to the pattern for how far in, what distance from the edge you should be sewing. I'm using my regular stitch length. So I'm just going to do one end on that one, and then I'm going to get this second one and do one side on this one as well. And then I can snip that first one off. It's just really good for making sure that you don't get any kind of bunching or funny thread things going on if you've got a little bit of a leader project on each. Okay, just positioning that in place. Right, great. So we can trim that. Don't need to worry too much about back stitching on these ones because they're going to be secured in place with another line of stitch, and I'm just tying the end off on that one because my stitch starts a little bit short of the end. Okay, so now we're going to grab our D-rings. You can swap these out for other hardware if you prefer. I know I've got 2 D-rings in my little pouch. There we go. Okay, so we're going to thread these through the D-rings and match the short ends together. And the same on this one. Okay. And all we're going to do is just stitch across these short ends to secure them into place. If you'd like to stitch near the top as well, you can, your choice. That sounded like my bobbin came unseated then. I think I might have loaded my bobbin incorrectly. So let me have a little look. Yeah. Let's just reload my bobbin. Give it a minute to think about its actions. Or my actions, because it was me who popped it in the first place. So I suppose it's oh dear. Oh, now it's fallen out again. It's probably a sign I should be standing up to do this, isn't it? Right, that's better. I wasn't standing up the first time I loaded it either, which is probably why it fell out. Okay. Right, so that's one of them sewn into place. That's very, very nice. I suspect that my D-rings are not fully accurate on the size because my strap tabs are, and yet my D-rings look slightly large. So I think they've probably measured them in metric and sold them as imperial, or vice versa. Seems to be what happens. Okay, that was better. Right, so those stitches are literally just to hold these in place while we're working with them. Okay, right, what we need now is our flap pieces. Okay, we can pop these to one side, ready for our flap, and we'll need our flap lining. So we need to find the center of this. So this is the piece, it's got interfacing, but it's also got a piece of fleece added as well. So find the center. And we find the center on this side as well. So we're going to be inserting our magnetic snap into this piece. There we go. So we found our center, and then we're going to make a mark 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters from the curved point, and that will be the center of our magnetic snap. Okay, so try and make sure that you're accurate here. Let's just double check my center on the top to make sure that I'm nice and accurate. Yeah, great. Okay, so that's the center of our magnetic snap. So retrieve the washer for your snap. And we're going to pop the washer, or the center of the washer, on the center point there, that mark that we made. And then we can draw a line that side and draw a line that side. That's where our prongs are going to go through. Now I'm going to cut those little slits very, very carefully with little snips. And then I can use my spoon just to make sure I haven't gone through actually to the fleece, so I should do that just very, very gently. Very, very, very gently. Okay, and add some fray check to this to make sure that the prong slits don't become too big over time. Leave that a second. Okay, and then we're going to add the raised side of the magnetic snap. Oh dear, there we go. So I would call that the male half. It's the bit that's got the little bump on it. Okay, we're going to pop that in, push the prongs through those slits that you've just made. Oh dear, hang on, we're not doing too well here. There's one. Nearly. Bend those in a bit so it matches my prong slits. Okay, I'll just push this down and make sure it's fully seated into the fleece, and then I'm going to have a look on the other side and check that looks good. Yeah, that looks great. It's not pulling, not buckled or anything. Add the washer now, because we've got a piece of fleece in here. You don't need to add a little bit of extra stabiliser, but you can if you want to. And then I'm going to bend my prongs inwards. I'm using my spoon for this. Just pop my thumb in the divot of the spoon and use it to bend them in. Okay, there we go. So they're nice and secure. And then just to make sure it doesn't rub through to the exterior fabric, I'm just going to add a little piece of duct tape. Okay, just to make sure they're extra secure, and also they are not going anywhere and it won't rub through then to my fabric. Okay, so now we need our exterior flap. And we're going to match these up together. Match your angled curve at the bottom. I'm just going to add a few clips. Right, hang on. I'm wondering whether I should have marked my seam allowance first on there. I think I should have marked my seam allowance. Hang on, let's go back. Let's rewind. Rewind. We could edit that out, but we won't. So and draw my seam allowance. I'm using a pencil for this because I find it's not very noticeable. Draw my seam allowance along here and along this curve, just so that I can make sure I'm really accurate when sewing that. Okay, pop these two back together. There's no point in clipping the top because we're only sewing the sides and this bottom edge. Clips going flying everywhere. I think that's why we've all got multiple clips there, isn't it? Because they do go flying. Okay, so we are just going to start at the top here, and I'll back stitch. I'm using my regular stitch length and the regular seam allowance in the pattern. I'm going to start at the top here, back stitch, sew to this pointed corner here and lift my presser foot and pivot, and follow this seam allowance that I've drawn on here back to this corner, pivot and back up to the top and back stitch at the end there. Okay. Grab my thread tails this time. So I'm back stitching here. And then I'm going to pivot and see if that's enough. It's not quite, so I'm going to take one more stitch and then pivot. If you think you can't quite get to a stitch, then lower your stitch length so you can be really accurate getting to these corners and curves. Okay, and as you come towards this curve, lift your presser foot and pivot how you need to, just to be able to be really nice and accurate. Okay, back to this second corner and then pivot and up the final edge. Go. Okay, so double check your curve on this front. That looks accurate to me. That's good. Okay, and then we're going to trim some of the fabric away. Okay. Let's see what we're going to do. We are going to grade the seam allowance, notch the curve and trim at the corners, then turn right sides out. So I think I'm going to cut across my corners first. So I'm cutting as much out of the seam allowance as I can without cutting too near to that stitching. And the same again in the top corner. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is try and trim a little bit more of this lining seam allowance away, just to reduce the bulk in this outside edge on your flap. So to grade it, all I'm doing is cutting through one layer. So I'm cutting through the lining layer only along the edge. You can see I've still got my exterior fabric there as the full seam allowance. There we go. Okay, now this curve, normally I would use pinking shears. However, I don't have mine at the moment, so all I'm going to do is cut some little snips in to the curve, just to take out little triangles of fabric away from there, just to reduce the amount of fabric in this seam allowance and help your curve sit really nice and neat. Is that enough? Maybe a couple more just to be sure. Great. Okay, lovely. So now we can turn it right sides out. What I like to do is push my thumbs into this curve right at the bottom and then push that out first, and then I do the same in the corner, push that out, and same in this corner, push that out. I do still use a tool, of course, but I just find that it helps with a good accurate turn through to start with. Okay, so you can run your fingers up inside the flap there. I'm going to use the end of my spoon just to make sure it's nice and pushed out along the seam line. And then I'm going to use the end of my spoon just to make sure these corners are nice and accurate, and that curve looks great. I think it was well worth taking the time to mark the seam allowance for that. Okay. Right, we are going to give it a little press. Press on the wrong side for me first, because my fabric is a little bit delicate, isn't it, with the glitter? So I can just make sure I get a real good deep press in here with a bit of pressure. Okay, just a word of warning, your magnetic snap will be hot, and I can tell you exactly how I just discovered that. Okay. Right, so what you want to do now is check the fit of your edge trim. So grab hold of your edge trim if you're using it and just slot it into place on the edge of the flap if you can. Mine's got the film still attached, so it's a little bit trickier. I'm leaving that film on until I know I'm definitely done, because I've got a brilliant habit of scratching hardware before I fitted it. Right, so check how that feels. If it feels like it's fitting nice and snugly, that's not quite centered, there we go. If it feels like it's fitting nice and snug, then that's okay. If not, you can go inside your flap and just add a couple of little extra strips of interfacing or Decaville, just so that that bulks up slightly exactly where your trim is going to go. Okay, so we can pop that to one side again for the minute. We'll add that right at the end. Okay, and then we're going to top stitch the 3 sides that we've sewn. Well, I suppose it's 4 actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we can baste across the top long open edge as well. Okay, so I'm going to start with the sewn sides and then I'll worry about the top edge afterwards. Okay. So I'm just going to start at the top here, and I'm going down to this corner, and then right now I can't get quite into the corner with the stitch length I'm using, so I'm going to go down and do an extra tiny stitch and then pivot. Okay, now take your time as you come up to this curve, just so you can take a real accurate guide on the edge of your flap for where to stitch. Okay, and I'm back to the corner on the other side. And I've pivoted and up to the top, my top stitch. And then what I'm going to do is I'll just pivot and sew my basting stitches. I'm just going to change my stitch length up to my basting stitches and sew across the top edge as well. And that's just to hold these layers together while you're working with them. Okay, lovely. Oh, I can get all my loose threads in one go there. Right, I'm going to change my stitch length back down just in case I forget. That looks great. I'm very happy with that, and it looks good on the back as well, because I took my time and I was nice and accurate on the stitching there, so that's good. I'm pleased with that. Right, let's have a look at what we need to do next. Okay, next we need to, I'm going to pop that washer to one side before I lose it. Next we need to grab back our strap tabs with D-rings attached, and we are going to pop these on top, so with the ring facing down towards the pointy end. Okay, and we are going to pop those 3/4 of an inch from each side, and that is to the edge of the tab. Okay, so measure your 3/4 of an inch, and then that's to the edge of the tab there. And we'll add a little clip just to hold it in place. And then we'll do the same on this side. Okay, so these will be sandwiched in between the flap and the back of the bag in the end. Okay. So we're just going to baste these in place, so I didn't need to change my stitch length. I'll go back up again to my basting stitch length and then just go across these. I'm going to go across them a couple of times because I'm using fabric. If you're using faux leather, you'll want to do it just once. And same the other side as well. There we go, I'm just trimming these threads. Lovely. Okay. Right, that's our flap done and ready to rock and roll. Okay, so now we're going to work on the main panels, the exterior main panels. Right, first thing we're going to do on our exterior panels is cut the corners out. Okay, so this is the front panel with the curved cut out at the top, and this is the bottom panel. So first of all, the back panel. So on the back panel, it doesn't really matter, just pay attention to which side you want the top and which side you want to be the bottom. And then we're going to cut our corner cut out. So I'm going to mark mine first because I've only got my tiny ruler with me, and I want to make sure I'm accurate before I cut. Okay, so let me measure that on my cutting mat and just make sure I'm nice and accurate. You know what they say, measure twice, cut once. Okay, so I've got one in that corner, so I'm going to mark the second one here in this corner. I'll turn it round to there. Okay, now we're going to cut this through all layers. Okay, on the bottom corners. There we go. Now we are also going to trim the foam again, so there's a 1/2 inch, 1.2 centimeters from the sides of the corner cutout. Okay, so again I'm going to draw this on first, just so that I can make sure I'm nice and accurate. You will need to cut out a couple of basting stitches to do this, so don't panic, that is intentional. Okay, and that's just going to reduce a bit of bulk in the boxed corners. Okay, so I'm just going to pull this back slightly, snip through a couple of basting stitches there, and then snip along this line. Do the same on this side, or can I maybe do it from the top? Might be a little bit easier. Yeah. So your Decaville light should go right to the corner cutout, but your foam will be slightly short, okay, just to reduce the bulk in that area. And now that will help your box corners sit really nice and neat. This is a lovely skill builder pattern because you're learning quite a lot of techniques that might be a little bit different from how you usually do them. Just got a little bit of foam attached in the corner there. Oh, I've managed it again. I've snipped it, but not the bit. Okay, there we go. So that's our back panel done. I'm going to do the same on the front panel, but remember for this one, we've got the curved cutout at the top. So we're going to be doing our cutouts on the bottom, the long straight edge. Okay, so I'm just drawing that. Just join up my lines, just to make sure it's nice and accurate. And the same on this side. Doing exactly the same as we did for the back panel, but this one just paying attention to where the corner curve, not corner curve, the curved cutout is. I think that's my #1 error in this video. It's calling it the wrong thing. Right, and then we're going to take an extra ½ inch. Let's measure that. And this side again, we're just going to trim the foam away to reduce the bulk, same as we did in the last one. Nearly there. Okay. Now I appear to have done something erroneous here because my Decaville doesn't meet quite to the corners. So I will double check that and correct it. But I think for this one that I'm making, it shouldn't make too much of a difference. I'll just double check that I've cut the right amount out. So this should be, I'll double check it on my mat. I should have double checked it before cutting really, shouldn't I? Yeah, I've cut slightly too big there. Okay. What was it we said? Cut, measure twice, cut once. Okay, so I have cut slightly too big there. So I will show you how to correct that. We're just going to even it out and smooth it out and pretend it doesn't exist, basically. Okay, so just in case you're wondering, that's how to correct that. Right, so we are also going to cut some foam out of the top corners here. Just going to cut a ½ inch away from the top. So let's actually measure this accurately this time. So that's there and there. Okay, and then we are going to cut again through your basting stitches just to remove this extra little bit of foam, and that's going to make top stitching much easier for you, because you leave in space in the top corner there for the seam allowances to all meet. Okay, Right, let's try this with my new improved accuracy. I believe in myself. If you've watched this video before, you're probably re-watching it thinking, no, you still make the error, because I'll probably make another error later, but I'm very sorry, I'll try not to. Right, so that's done. Let's do the same on our back panel. I'm just measuring the 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimetres if you're in metric. 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch. There we go, and we're just going to trim this extra bit of foam away, and then we can move on to something a bit more fun, like some actual sewing, which would be nice. I can see a lot of these in my future. I think this is a great pattern, very versatile. I think you could use this for a lot of occasions, or even if you just don't want to carry a big bag around with you, you're just running some errands, want to just take the bare essentials with you. Okay, right, there we go, we've done that. Phew. Okay, so we need to, we'll pop our back away. Let me just check that's the back. Yeah, and we'll get our front. Okay, and I'm going to find the center on this panel. So I'm folding it in half, just pulling it out to find the center and making a little mark there. And then I'm going to add a pin so that I can see that on the right side of my fabric as well. Oh, lovely. Oh, look, I've colour coded it as well. It's blue. Great. Okay, so once we've found the centre, we're going to make a mark 3¼ inches or 8.3 centimetres down from the top edge, making sure it's nice and centred. And then we're going to draw a dot. I'll use my pink pen for this one. I've forgotten the measurement already. There we go. No, hang on. I think I might need to do this on the mat. I'm not doing very well with measurements today, am I? Right, 3¼ is to the, between the G and the R on my ruler. Oh, I see, I was going to the 1/8. No wonder it didn't look quite right. Okay, so I'm just drawing a little dot, and that is going to be the centre of our magnetic snap. Just trying to get hold of my washer without losing my placement. Okay, so we can, oh, there we go, pop our washer on top and draw the prong slit marks. Oh, lovely. That shows up really well for me in person. I'm sorry if you can't see it too well on the screen. A bit hard on this busy fabric, but the fabric's so beautiful. Okay, so I'm just snipping through those two little marks, and then I'm going to pop the end of my scissors in. Do you know, let's be careful on this one. Let's pop a pin in at the top of that slit and the top of that slit. Pop my scissors in so that I don't go too far. There we go. Okay, so that should be fairly okay. Let's test it with the magnetic snap before I go any further. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Let's add a little dab of fray check and insert the snap. So this is the other half of the snap, one with a little bit of a dip in it, and the washer, and then bend these prongs inwards. Just gives it something to hang on to, which is why I do them inwards rather than outwards. And then we'll add a little bit of tape to the back just to secure those, and make sure that they're not going to rub through to anything, because this will be rubbing through to our lining. Okay, right, so that looks great. Okay, so that's our front. Do you know, I'm going to leave my pin in to mark the centre, just so that I know that's where it is. And we'll retrieve our back. And I should probably have found the centre of this one as well. So let's find the centre now. Okay, there it is. Let's mark it first and then add a pin. Okay. Lovely. And then we're going to add our flap onto our back. Needed a centre mark on this one as well. Let's add a centre mark on this one. Okay, and we're going to position these right sides together. So matching up my centres. Let's add a couple of clips. And I've got right sides together. Okay. Make sure those strap tabs with your D-rings are hanging down inside between the layers. They're nice and secure in there. Down is better than up at this point, because you don't want that D-ring getting caught in your stitching. You want to know exactly where it is. You want it to be hanging down out of the way. Okay. Right, so now we're going to baste this into place, okay, along the top long edge. So I'm on my basting stitch already. Now I am going to back stitch at the start and the end of this. It doesn't really need it because we are going to sew it in again, but I just want to know that that flap is nice and secure. And I'm going to back stitch at the end as well. Lovely. Okay. Just double check your rings are still hanging down. Yep, great. Okay, so now we're going to pop our front and our back together. Okay, now the magnetic snaps won't match, and that's okay. They're not supposed to match yet. Okay, so right sides together, front and back, and we are going to match up the sides and the bottom edges. Match up both my side edges first, I think, and then I know that they're nice and accurate. A couple more clips. I'm sure I overuse clips, but it's nice to be secure sometimes, isn't it? Okay, and then I'm just going to make sure that that bottom edge is nice and matched up. Add a few clips, and we're going to sew from top to bottom, back stitching at the start and the end, side to side, back stitching at the start and the end, and then top to bottom the other side, back stitching at the start and the end. Okay, so we've got our flap sandwiched in there. Okay, so just ignore that. Make sure that your ring tabs or your D-rings are out of the seam allowance. Okay, so change your stitch length back down to the accurate, to the right stitch length. Okay, I'm going to start at the top with a back stitch and sew down the sides and a back stitch, and then across the bottom, starting with a back stitch. And up the other side, starting with a back stitch again. How did you guess? Okay, lovely. Right, so we can trim all of these extra threads. Okay, I think I will leave those pins in actually and try really hard not to spike myself. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is box the corners by bringing the seams together. Okay, so pop one hand inside and just flatten that out. I like to open my seam allowances on the side and the bottom. You can do that by just popping your fingers inside that little box opening, making sure it's nice and flat, and then I'll add a clip there to hold it. And I like to just smooth along the inside. Do you know, I think I'm gonna go a bit over short and see if I can pop a pin in the center there as well, just to make sure that those seams that are matched are really accurate. Let's have a little look. Yeah, that's great. And I'll do the same on this side. Open up my seam allowances, just using my fingers to press them open really. And then match these seams together. Through the seam allowances there. Okay, now where I've cut this not fully accurately, you can see that my edges don't quite match up, so just flatten them out so they look nice and neat. And all we're going to do is just trim this extra off, and hey presto, they match perfectly and nobody is any the wiser apart from you, and you won't tell. I'm sure you won't tell. Okay, right, we're going to sew these then using the regular seam allowance. I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. Okay, trim that thread and trim that thread. Just double check that before you move on. Take my pin out. Just double check you're happy with that. Yeah, I'm happy with that. We'll do the same on the second corner. Back stitch at the start and the end again. Trim that thread. Okay, and just double check those. That bottom corner before you move on. Yep, I'm happy with that. Okay, so now we can turn this right sides out. You can trim away any extra stabilizer in your near the top seam if you'd like. If you haven't got a very strong machine, then I'd recommend you do that. And then you can turn this right sides out very carefully if you've still got pins sticking in through your fabric. Turn this right sides out very gently. Push out your bottom corners, and that should give you a little hint of how your bag is going to look at the end. Okay, so without a lining, but that's how your bag is going to look once it's all nice and finished. Okay, so you can pop this to one side, and we're going to get started on the lining. Okay, next we're going to work on our lining. So get your lining front and back, and I've placed mine together, just right sides together, so you can see the curved cutout, and we're going to cut our boxed corners for these. Now this time I'm going to try and be really accurate. Okay, so it should be 1.5 inches. Okay, now make sure you are cutting these from the bottom So the curved cutout should be at the top. Drawing them first, just so I can make sure that I'm doing them nice and accurately, because I don't have the greatest track record on this video as yet, but there's always hope. Okay, so I'm just going to double check that those are accurate. They are. That is accurate that way and that way. I'm just using my mat to double check measurements. Okay, great. So I can cut those out. I'm going to cut through both of my layers at once because I'm feeling a little bit risky. I've already had to trim the exterior, so what's the worst that could happen? And I've measured twice, you saw me, and I'm only cutting once for 2 corner cutouts. So I'm just having it over the edge so I can do it nice and accurately for the both layers. Okay. Oh, not quite snipped through there. Okay, lovely. Right, we can pop those to one side for the minute. We will be using them again though. And then we'll get one of our zipped pocket pieces, E, and on the wrong side, we're going to draw a rectangular box. I'm going to pop it 1/2 inch from the top of the pocket. So let's draw a line 1/2 inch away. That's 1.2 centimeters if you are working in metric. Should probably find the center of this. Let's have a look at the center, which will help me to be a bit more accurate. There's the center. Okay, so the box is going to be 3/8 of an inch deep, or 1 centimeter. So I can draw another line 3/8 of an inch under the first line, and 7 inches wide. That's 17.8 centimeters. So let's mark up my 3.5 from the center is there, and then 3.5 from the center this way is there. Oh dear, my lines were not quite long enough. Let's extend these slightly. And we're going to draw also inside this box. We're going to draw a horizontal line through the middle of the box. Okay, now I've got my piece upside down actually, but it doesn't matter for the minute as long as I put it on the right way when I attach it to my main panel. And then a little triangle at each end. Okay, lovely. So we are going to pop this box, we're going to pop this piece onto our lining back. Okay, so that's the piece without the curved cutout, and I'm going to find my center so I can make sure I'm placing this in the middle. There's my center. Okay, and then we're going to pop that in the middle, so matching the middles, and I'm going to pop this pocket piece 1 inch from the top edge. And that one's easy because this ruler is 1 inch, so I can do that one fairly accurately. And I marked the center of that one, so that's good. Okay, I'm going to pop a little pin in either side just to hold it in place while we're working with it. And then I'm going to use my regular stitch length. I'm going to sew around the outside of the box. Okay, so I'm going to start in this top corner here, a little bit in from the edge. I'm going to start with my needle down. I'm going to sew to the corner, stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot, sew along the short ends, do the same again all the way round. Okay, so I'm stopping my presser foot down, pivoting all the way around until I have sewn around the entire box. If you don't think you can get to the corners completely accurately, then change your stitch length down to a smaller stitch length just to get you right into that corner for accuracy. So I haven't backstitched. What I'm going to do is I'm going to overlap a couple of stitches. Now I'm close, but I'm not going to be able to do it in the next stitch. So change down to a stitch length number 1. And then we pivot. No, I need to go just a teensy weensy little bit more. There we go, and then pivot. There we go, and I'm at the corner. Now my pin is going to be in the way, so let's take that out before we go. Sew back up to the next corner. And then pivot. And back to where we started. Now I'm going to overlap a couple of stitches just so they don't come out. Okay. Trim these threads. I always think the truth is revealed on the back when you look at the accuracy, which is why I don't look too closely on the back. Okay, now this is the fun bit. What we're going to do is cut along our central line. I'm going to use my rotary cutter just to start me off. Be quite careful with that. Okay, and then I'm going to finish cutting along the centre line to the centre or the point of the triangle that we've done in each end, and then up each arm of the triangle into the corner. Okay, now you might find that using smaller scissors is easier, but I find that I've got a better point on these bigger scissors. So you know your tools, don't be put off by my using big scissors. Use your little scissors if you can get a real good accurate point on them. Okay, right, lovely. Okay, so let's just double check where we're going now with this. Turn the page just in case I forget anything. Okay, now I'm going to press on this side first, just to really sink those stitches into my fabric. Okay, and then I'm going to press up against the pocket piece, so I get a real nice accurate press there, and then I'm going to press down away and push my pocket piece. Okay, and then on each side. Okay, so we're pushing against the pocket piece each time just to get a real nice accurate sew. Okay, and then I'm going to pop that through the hole. Give it a nice little tug. Make sure that nestles through there. Okay. Now I'm going to press from this side first, because I find that inevitably you do get puckers in the corners when making these kind of pockets. So if I press from the right side, I know that any puckers are going to be hidden on the inside of my pocket. So I've pressed along the bottom straight edge first. That's the easiest place to start because you've got the bulk of fabric there and it will sit nice and neat. And then I'm just pulling the pocket back inside and press along a bit at the top, and then just finger roll the last of that top edge. Give it a little press, and then on the little ends here, give that a little tug. So what you can do, if you're finding it's not quite sitting fully right, warm it up with the iron, give it a little press, and then give it a tug, and that should help you to manipulate it into place. Okay, lovely. So now we need some basting tape. And my basting tape doesn't have the best reputation for being all that sticky. I think it might be to do with the damp in the studio or the dehumidifier that we use to combat the damp. Either way. Now we're going to add some basting tape on the wrong side. Okay, top and bottom of the box as close as we can to the edge, but without it peeking through. So if your tape is a little bit useless like mine, I probably need to start storing it in a bag or a box or something. But I say that and then I never remember to. So I'm going to add it onto the top and the bottom. So just press it down really well. So if yours is not quite so sticky like mine, just give it a real good finger press down. Okay. And then you can take the backing paper off and hopefully your tape will remain in place. Lovely. Okay, I mean it's not secure, but it's there. It's there. Right, quick. So I need my zip now. Okay, and I've added my metal stopper, my zip pull. Now my zip is way too long. Okay, so I can cut that down to size, but I'm going to actually use it first and then cut it down to size afterwards. So I'm going to pop it through the zip box opening and just press lightly, and then I'm going to turn it over and oh look, it's fallen out already. I'm going to turn it over and make sure that it's nice and central through that box. Okay, and give it a good press down just to hold it in place. Okay, press again on this side. Now I can trim my extra tape. Probably need my stronger scissors for this one. Trim my extra tape to match with the edges of the pocket. Okay. Now we are going to sew around the box. I'm going to start around about there-ish, and we are going to sew 2 mil away from the opening. That's a real scant top stitch. Okay. If you don't feel so comfortable doing that, then go slightly in a bit, but try and keep it as scant as you can without going off the edge of the fabric. Okay, so I'm going to start and I'm going to sew to the corner and then again lift my presser foot and pivot. Remember, you can change your stitch length down to be more accurate if you need to. Going to lift my presser foot and move this zip pull out of the way, because that will distort things as I sew if I'm not too careful. And pivot and then up the short end. And pivot. Now I'm not quite there, so go down a little bit, take one tiny stitch, and then I can pivot. Okay, and I'll move my zip pull back along. Now I wonder if I can pull my, I'm going to pull my top thread through to the back now so that it's in place ready for me to cut off later nice and accurately. And then pivot along the short end. Oh, and that time it was perfectly sized, that stitch, so that's okay. And I've just overlapped a couple of stitches just for a bit of extra security. Okay, and just tug on the bobbin thread so that top thread is buried nice and secure. Okay, lovely. Now I'm going to open my zip just a little bit so I know that it's open and that zip pull is not going to get in the way anywhere. Okay, now we need our second zip pocket piece, E. I'm going to pop it directly over our existing pocket piece, right sides together. Okay, and then I'm going to pin those together just through the pocket pieces. Now if you've got a preferred pocket method and this is not it, then please do feel free to change up how we're doing the zip pocket. And as well, if you'd like to have the bag turning through the zip pocket and leave the turning gap inside the zip pocket, then please do that now. This method has the turning gap in the bottom of the lining, but if you prefer to have it in the zip pocket, then just modify that now. Okay, now I'm turned over and I'm just matching up these edges, the pocket piece edges on this side, just so I can know that they are nice and accurate. Okay, now we are going to sew across the top of the pocket piece as close as we can. Okay, so that's this piece here. Okay, we're going to sew along the top, matching these tops. That one's come slightly distorted, so let's move that up slightly. As close as we can, not catching the lining main panel. Okay, so hang on, let me put a pin in that one as well. Just so I know that that's staying in place. So I'm going to change, yeah, I'm on the right stitch length and I'm starting at the top and I'm going to back stitch. Now I'm sewing as close as I can to the lining without sewing onto the lining. Okay, I'm just sewing through the pattern piece, the pocket pieces, sorry, at the moment. Now I'm going to try and tug that pocket piece there underneath, just so those can pull into shape. Lovely. Okay, and back stitch. Now I'm going to back stitch a little bit more and then pivot, because we're going to sew down the side and then along the bottom and back up the other side. Okay, and pivot. So my lining is completely free. I'm only sewing on the pocket pieces. And then up the final side. So make sure you're not catching your lining pieces when you're doing this. You're only sewing on the pocket pieces. Okay, right, I think that is good, but we'll take these pins out and have a little look. Okay, so how does it look from the right side? From the right side it looks good, the zip works. Let's have a feel, there's no holes in there. That is good. Okay, great job everybody. Right, what we're going to do now is we are going to sew our lining together. Okay, so I'm just going to pause you here and I'm going to run and get a little label to sew into my side seam. So if you like to put labels in, then you should also do that now, and then we'll sew the lining together and get this bag finished. As if by magic, a label has appeared. Okay, so now we're going to take our lining back that we've just added the zip pocket to, and the lining front together, right sides together, and we're matching up corner cutouts, the sides, the bottom, all the edges, and then we're going to clip these together and we're going to sew them together. This bag's coming together lovely, isn't it? And we're nearly done, which is great if you're preparing it on your way to a party. You're nearly ready to go. Okay, now on the bottom we are going to leave a gap of around about 6 inches or 15 centimeters. So make sure to mark that on your lining. So my ruler is exactly 6 inches. I'm just going to mark that there, and that will indicate to me where to start and stop sewing. Now I'm not going to leave this open though. What I'm going to do, I'm going to start at this top edge and back stitch. I'm going to sew to here and back stitch, and I'm going to start here and back stitch, and I'm going to sew to the first mark, my turning gap, and back stitch. Then I'm going to change my stitch length up to my basting stitch and sew across to the second mark. Then I'm going to go back down to my regular stitch length and back stitch and sew to the end and back stitch. and then sew back stitch at the start all the way to the top and back stitch at the end. Okay, so at the end what we'll have is back stitching at the start and end and side, stitching all along the side, all along that side and between these two marks, and then we'll have basting stitching in the middle with back stitches at the start and the end of the turning gap. Okay, and that will just help that to stop or to keep from spreading too far when we are turning our bag through. Now I've just started and I forgot to look at the seam allowance. Okay, so we're going to start with our regular seam allowance and then we're going to increase to a 1/2 inch or 12mm seam allowance within the first 2 inches of sewing. Okay, so there's my regular seam allowance, and now I'm just increasing to the bigger seam allowance and back stitching at the end, and then onto the bottom. So the bottom we're going to sew with this larger seam allowance. This will just take up some of the slack of the lining. Now I'm at my first mark, so I'm back stitching, changing up to my longer basting stitch length, keeping that larger seam allowance, and I'm at my second mark, so changing back down to my regular seam allowance, and I'm going to go forwards and back and then to the end. Now this is the fun bit, because we start on the bigger seam allowance and we have to taper back to the smaller seam allowance by the time we get to the top. Okay, so just bear that in mind, and by the time you get to the top you should be back to the smaller seam allowance. Trim these extra threads and away from the corner as well. And these extra threads at the top here. Okay. So I'm gonna just give that a little finger press. That will help my turning gap to turn through nicely later. Let's just steam press those stitches, and that will leave us a little line of stitch holes to follow then when we come to close that turning gap. Make sure it's folded under nicely. Okay, lovely. Right, next thing we're going to do is box our corners the same as we did before. So open up that seam allowance of the bottom seam and then bring it to match the seam of the side, and open up those corners as well. Add a little pin so we can make sure that we're nice and accurate. Okay, and then the same on the other side. I'm opening up the seam allowance on the bottom and bringing it to match the seam allowance on the side, and then flatten it out nice and neat, and I'll add a pin. Now we're going to sew across these at the larger seam allowance, so double check your pattern for that. And we're going to back stitch at the start and the end. And then the other side, exactly the same. Back stitch at the start and the end. Again, that larger seam allowance. There we go, lovely. So that's our lining all prepared. Now let's open this turning gap in the bottom, because that's going to give us a little bit of extra wiggle space when we're popping the two together. So all I do is just take these stitches out, and they're nice and big so they are easy to come out, and they'll leave behind a little row of stitch holes along that seam allowance. just so that you can follow that when turning the turning gap under and closing it later. Okay, lovely. There we go. Lovely. Right, so now we're ready to pop it all together. Okay, so what we need to do is retrieve our exterior. And now the choice is yours. You can either pop the exterior inside the lining, and that means you don't have to turn it through so many times at the end. You've just got to turn it through the turning gap and that's it, you're done. Whereas the other way, if you turn this inside out and this one right sides out and pop that one inside this one, then it's slightly easier to fit, but you do have to turn it through and then turn it back through again. So it's your choice which one you prefer. Okay, now I haven't marked the centers on my lining panel, so let's do that just for a moment before we go ahead and pop them in, because I've left my pins in to indicate where the centers are so we can be nice and accurate, so we might as well use them. There's the center on that panel. And here's the center on this panel. Okay. So what you want to do is determine which side you want to be on the outside for doing this. So I'm going to try and put my exterior inside my lining, and your flap should be hanging down. Okay, and we're just going to pop this inside the lining. Okay, now this is a super tight fit, okay, and that's okay, that's how it's supposed to be. Now match up your back panel and your front panel. So remember, the front panel's got this curved cutout and the back panel has got both the zip pocket and the flap. Okay, so the flap should be sandwiched in between them, hanging down inside along with your strap tabs. So I've just matched the side seam and the center. Let's match the other side seam. Now this is lovely to fit together because you've cut away that extra stabilizer in those tricky areas. Okay, so just squash it down so it fits in nicely. Don't be afraid to manipulate the fabric on this one. Okay, and match that up. Now I like to pin at this point just to stop these layers coming apart in your when you're stitching around the top. I was going to say top stitching because I mean stitching around the top, but it's not top stitching, is it? It's stitching around the top, which is just extra confusing. So where you've got your curved cutout, make sure your lining is pulled up to match that top edge nicely, and this is why I'm using pins, because I know then that that's not going to shift at all when I'm sewing around the top, because I don't want to sew around the top and then discover that actually the lining had shifted and I've sort of sewn it half off the edge. Okay, so just pull that up. We're just going to ease around the entire top. Now if you're finding this is really too tough, if you've got maybe your hands struggle a little bit to do things like this with thick fabrics, then do turn it the other way around. That's okay, you can do that absolutely, and we'll just turn it through an extra turn when we've finished at the end. Okay, now it's going to be a little bit thick around here because you've got the strap tabs and the flap to contend with. Okay, but you've cut a lot of stabilizer out of the seam allowances, so we should be okay. I'm just very carefully pinning everything in place so that I know that all my top edges match nice and neat. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to sew around the entire top edge. Now go slowly when you come to where your strap tabs are, Now I'm going to change my needle up for a bigger needle or stronger needle. So I'm going to take out my 11 and pop in a 16 because we are going through quite a few layers here. And although we've cut out a lot of the stabiliser, there is still stabiliser in this seam. So just change up your needle if you need to as well. As you can see, I am wearing a hat because it's very, very cold in the studio today. So please excuse my rather festive hat, especially if you're not watching this in December, because if you're not, you'll think, why is she wearing a festive hat when it's not December? But, it's because it's very, very cold. Okay, so I'm going to start at the middle of the back edge and I'm going to start with my needle down, so that means I can lift my hands and move them around if I need to readjust, and it won't, my project won't go anywhere. So I've back stitched at the start and I'm just manoeuvring the bag around however I need to, manipulating this fabric so that I can sew around the entire top. Now when you get to the curved cutout, just adjust your presser foot to be able to follow that nice and accurately. I've got a flatbed machine, so I'm sewing inside the bag. But if you've got a free arm, then you'll be able to pop this on the free arm and sew around very nicely. Okay. So I just need to manoeuvre slightly so I can maintain that accurate seam allowance. And as I'm coming back around to where I started, I'm just manoeuvring this out of the way. And then I'm just back stitching over where I started. Okay, now before I cut anything or trim anything or do anything, I'm just going to have a quick look around the entire top and check that everything is caught where it's supposed to be caught. And it is, so I can take my pins out. That's good. We're very, very nearly finished now. I'm getting excited about seeing my finished bag. Okay, just take all these pins out all the way round. Lovely. Okay, so I can reach through and just have a little feel along the top edge to check that everything is where it's supposed to be. And I like to do that before I turn through, just in case I've got any puckers or ruckles that I need to edit, unpick and redo. Okay, great. Now if you have got a domestic machine, you might want to unpick some of your basting stitches around the top and take away any excess stabiliser from this top seam, because you have got a little bit in there. My machine is very strong, so I'm not going to, but you will get a much neater finish, especially on a domestic machine, if you do. Okay, then we'll gently, I say gently, here's me forcing it through, push our bag through that turning gap in the lining. Okay, and just make sure everything is nicely pushed out, all the corners are nicely pushed out. And what I like to do while my hand is inside, I like to just pull these top corners, make sure the seam allowances are still open, and fold that down and give that a little clip. Just so I know those seam allowances, that's not too bulky in those top corners then, because I've made sure that they are pushed out fully. Okay, and the same in that top corner. Great. Okay, so I'm going to pull all of these just very gently. I'm just tugging the lining away from the exterior, and then we can push the lining down inside. Oh gosh, look at that. It's getting exciting. And then you can press the top of your bag. In fact, you probably should press the top of your bag, but I'm just going to finger roll. just because I haven't got a sleeve board or anything up here with me. Just got that tiny pressing mat. Now finger rolling the lining round to the back and clipping on this top edge. Okay. All the way around. So that's all the way around the front. That's nice and neat. Now on the back, what I like to do is make sure that my zip pocket is pushed down inside, and then I just smooth this out, and you can pin this then to make sure that all the layers are exactly where you want them to be. Okay, so your D-rings should be poking up towards the flap. Let's pull that out, pop a little pin in here to hold that. Oh, I had an extra one there. Buy one get one free. Okay, and the same on this side. And then again, somewhere in the middle-ish, around about there, will be fine. And that's just to hold these layers all together. Now we're going to top stitch around the entire top of the bag. Okay, now because I've got a flatbed, I'm going to turn my bag inside out so that I'm top stitching on the outside fabric, and I can be a little bit more accurate and neater then, because there's nothing worse than doing a beautiful top stitch on the lining and then turning it through to discover that it looks awful on the outside. So it doesn't really matter if my lining's not so neat because it's inside, but my exterior I want to look really neat. Okay, so I'm gonna use my top stitching stitch length, which for me is slightly longer than my construction stitch length. I'm gonna pop it under the machine, probably gonna start around here-ish, just after the edge of the flap, and I'm gonna sew around the entire front and the entire back, making sure that all the layers are nice and flat under the presser foot as I'm sewing. Okay, so whatever you need to do to be able to get those layers nice and flat, because that is the key to a nice neat top stitch at the end. Okay, so again I'm going to start with my needle down just to make sure that if I need to adjust my hands I can, and it won't affect the position of the bag. So as I go, I'm just going to be pulling my lining down and away from this top seam to make sure it's nice and neat inside as well as on the outside. And that curved cutout, make sure you're following the line of the fabric as accurately as you can. Okay, and that one need to just pull the line in back slightly just to make sure it's kept in place. There we go. See if I can try and fold this flap back so you can actually see what I'm doing. So again, because I haven't got a free arm, I'm sewing inside my bag but on my exterior fabric. Okay, and as we come round to the flap then, just be very, very conscious of where your D-rings are. So I want my D-rings to be up facing the flap. And sewn around the entire top. So on the back, you're just adding your seam allowance, or how far you're stitching away from that seam where the flap meets the back of the bag. Okay, and we're back round nearly to where we started. Again, making sure my D-ring is up facing the flap, and just flattening this down so I can get back to where I started. And I'm going to back stitch over a couple and then pull that out. Lovely. Okay, just trimming my threads. although I'm sure I'll be picking threads off because that's what we always seem to do, isn't it? No matter how careful we are with our threads. Right, lovely. Okay. Oh, I've lost the clip. There we go. Right, so we'll take these pins out and then have another check. Check we're all okay. Yep, great. Okay. Now, what I would like to do, which I'm not going to do right now because I'm upstairs and I've only got my little pressing mat, is give this a real good press. So I'm going to do that after I've finished. But what I'm going to do is cover my hand in an oven mitt. I've got a pressing glove actually. Looks a bit like an oven mitt, and I'm going to hold my hand inside the bag and just give it a press. If you've got a sleeve board or a little end on your ironing table, then that's perfect for this situation. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is close the turning gap. Now the neatest way to do this is to hand sew it, but I absolutely detest hand sewing, so I'm going to use my machine. Okay, so I'm just folding under those seam allowances, so I'm following the line of stitch holes that we left when we opened our turning gap, took out my basting stitches, and I'm just pinning this closed. I'm going to pin all the way along. And then I'm just going to do a really close top stitch on mine. Okay, you can hand sew if you would prefer to. It will result in a neater finish, but it's such a tiny bag that I haven't found my turning gaps being too obvious. Okay, just trim these threads. We're very, very, very close to being done, apart from my final press, which I will do as well. Okay, so pop your lining into the bag, push it down, make sure it's nice and snug. Mine looks very nice and snug without even having a press. It'll look even more snug once it's been pressed. Okay, next we need to retrieve our metal edge trim. Do you remember that one? Okay, and we'll need a little screwdriver. I'm just going to get my stool so that I can be a little bit more comfortable and try not to lose any of my screws on this one. Now this should, in theory, just slide on into place, but because I've got my plastic still on it, I just want to make sure that this is away from the edge, because I've done things like this before and then the plastic's gotten stuck underneath. So I'm just pulling the plastic away from the edge. You can probably hear it better than you can see it. Now if you've got a little bit of leftover fleece laying around, you can work on that just to prevent any scratches. I'm going to check there's nothing on my board, and then slide this on over the edge of my flap. Okay, now make sure that's on really, really snug, and make sure it's nicely centered to your magnetic snap. Okay, there is a little bit of wiggle room in it. Make sure it's on nice and accurate. Now you can glue this if you are comfortable with that. However, it can get a bit messy, even for those of us who love to use glue for everything. So I'm not going to use glue at the moment. I might come back and use some glue later, but the screws should be okay on their own. So let's get these screws. So there's 4 screw holes and I've got 6 screws, which makes me think that Janelle knows that I generally like to lose screws. Or we all do, maybe, I don't know. Okay, so I'm just popping the end of my screwdriver into the screw hole, or into the screw, and then make sure it's nice and upright, dead straight upright. And I'm going to screw that in, not fully tight, because I don't want the other ones to distort it out of place. And I'm working from the outside in, this one. So I'm going to do my 2 outside screws first. Okay, and now you can go ahead and tighten that up. Just be careful you don't slip, because you will scratch the metal trim. Okay, and then the final 2 screws. Pop those in. Just make sure your screwdriver is completely upright to get a nice accurate insertion. Don't want it to go in at an angle or thread the screw. Okay. And the final one. Okay, now you can choose whether to pop the plastic back over your metal edge trim, or whether you're going to leave it off. I'm going to pop mine back over just to protect it while I'm in the studio until it comes to be used. Okay, so double check your magnetic snap does up. Bit too late if not, isn't it? But luckily it does. Probably should have checked it earlier. And then we'll add our strap on just by clipping it into place like so, and that's it. Your bag is complete, and I think this is a great make. It's a great gift. It's great for lots of different occasions, weddings, parties, date nights, pop into the shops where you don't want to carry too much. You can really make it in a lot of different fabrics and make it your own. So this is just the fabrics that I've chosen, but you can make it however you like, and I think it's a great size. You could, my phone is right here, so I'll show you the size of it compared to your phone. So there's plenty of space here for my phone and my purse and a pack of tissues and my car keys, but it's not too much, it's not too big. I really hope you sewed along with me today, and if you do, we'd love to see your makes. Please tag us. She Wears Red Feathers, that's Lynn Potts, the designer of this bag, or at Sewing Patterns by Mrs H, that's me, who's worked with Lynn to get this to you so that you can use this fabulous pattern. Thank you so much for joining me, and please do show us what you make.